Do you remember what you did, son, or not?
Of course I remember.
You killed a young girl.
I know. I know the seriousness of the situation.
And why did you do that?
On the morning of Monday, February 22nd, 2021, 19-year-old college student Ingrid Bueno left her home in São Paulo, telling her parents she was heading to a training session for school. After that, she stopped answering calls and messages. Just a few hours later, local law enforcement received a report. At an undisclosed address, the body of a young woman had been found, but her identity was still unknown. No one could understand who she was, where she came from, or how she ended up in a stranger's home. Around the same time, videos began appearing online. At first, they didn't draw much attention, but it soon became clear they were connected to a real-life incident, not fiction. Ingrid Bueno was born in April 2001 in São Paulo. From an early age, she was known for her calm personality, friendliness, and easygoing nature. Friends and family admired her sharp mind, striking looks, and self-confidence. She enjoyed cosplay, experimenting with makeup and clothing styles, and playing video games. In her teenage years, she became an avid player of Call of Duty Mobile. Using the screen name Sol, she played on an all-female team, took part in tournaments, and helped coach newcomers. At the same time, she enrolled in a university nursing program. Her desire to help others shaped much of her life. She was attentive to loved ones, caring, and genuinely kind-hearted. However, her personal life had its challenges. In her teens, she went through a difficult situation after meeting someone online. The experience seriously damaged her trust in others and caused deep emotional distress. To cope with the aftermath, she began seeing a counselor and gradually returned to a sense of normalcy. From that point on, she preferred online communication, where she felt safer. The virtual world became her comfort zone and an outlet for self-expression. In another part of São Paulo lived Guilherme Costa, the youngest in a low-income family. His father had left when he was still young, and his mother worked as a cleaner, often away from home. As a boy, Guilherme was quiet and polite, helped with chores, went to church, and was interested in theology. He even dreamed of becoming a preacher. But in 2019, tragedy struck. His older brother passed away. The loss deeply affected him, and he withdrew from others, lost interest in religion, and began speaking negatively about Christianity. His appearance also changed. He wore only black clothing, avoided socializing, and at one point, temporarily left home. The family couldn't afford professional counseling. The only pastime that seemed to help him cope was video gaming. He also gravitated toward Call of Duty Mobile, though he never reached the same skill level as Ingrid. He ended up joining a less competitive team. Over time, Guilherme began exploring questionable online spaces, interacting with people who displayed troubling behavior, and visiting closed forums where aggressive ideas were shared. In everyday life, however, he remained unremarkable to those around him, and no one suspected how extreme his views had become. Although Ingrid and Guilherme lived in the same city, they were headed in completely opposite directions. She was working toward a career in stability, while he was sinking deeper into isolation and detachment. What eventually brought them together was an online game, a connection that would soon take a tragic turn. Their first interaction happened in November 2020, during a casual match of Call of Duty Mobile. It wasn't part of a tournament. No judges, no prizes, no audience. Just an informal team session with players from different cities. They happened to be on the same side, and that was enough to spark a conversation. Normally, Ingrid kept her distance when meeting new people online, but this time she took note of one teammate, Guilherme. Using his gamer tag, he came across as friendly and non-intrusive, occasionally sharing personal stories. When Ingrid found out he lived in the same city, in the Pirituba neighborhood, she decided to continue talking with him outside of the game. Guilherme quickly figured out how to earn her sympathy. He began opening up about his life, focusing on his family struggles. The way he told his stories was meant to present himself as someone who had been through a lot, but had managed to hold on to his humanity. Being naturally empathetic and supportive, Ingrid paid attention and listened. He stayed in touch without crossing boundaries, never making pushy moves. On the contrary, he appeared humble and reserved. Ingrid didn't see him as a potential romantic partner but believed he lacked support, and she was willing to offer that. Their conversations became frequent. Guilherme was almost always online, talking about himself, his thoughts, and occasionally hinting at emotional challenges. Gradually, his messages became more personal, and he began asking about her life, family, and studies. One day, he told her directly that he considered their connection special and saw her as more than just a friend. Ingrid was clear and straightforward in her response. She explained she wasn't looking for a romantic relationship and wanted to keep things strictly friendly. Her message left no room for doubt. Guilherme didn't argue or show offense at the time. Instead, he replied that he understood her stance and promised he wouldn't pressure her. Nothing in their chat suggested any open conflict. Because of this growing connection, Ingrid began mentioning Guilherme to her friends. One of them, her ex-boyfriend Alan, heard her say she'd met someone through gaming who, in her words, seemed to be going through a rough chapter in life. She added that he had unusual views and interests. When Alan realized who she was talking about, he became concerned. Guilherme had a certain reputation in the gaming community, known for questionable content on his profile and unpredictable behavior. Ingrid didn't take these warnings seriously. She saw him as a withdrawn teen with emotional scars, someone who simply lacked social interaction. In her mind, that explained his odd behavior. She reassured herself and others that it wasn't a sign of danger, just the result of a difficult past. Over time, she began feeling responsible for him. He often told her he trusted no one but her, using phrases like, "You're the only one who understands me," or, "I feel more free when you're around." While not overt manipulation, these words placed an emotional weight on her. His need for her attention kept growing, and she felt guilty even thinking about ending the conversation. From the outside, nothing about their interaction looked alarming, but a subtle dependency was forming. Even then, Ingrid still didn't see Guilherme as dangerous. To her, he was just an unlucky teen with a tough background. She sensed no threat coming from him. Meanwhile, he was methodically solidifying her role in his life, part of a deliberate plan that would soon push beyond the boundaries of ordinary communication. A few weeks after they first connected, Guilherme's tone began to shift. His messages increasingly hinted at hopelessness, emphasizing that he was holding on thanks to only one person, Ingrid. Eventually, he started sending her photos of himself holding weapons, insisting they were airsoft replicas used for sport. Ingrid didn't see them as serious, though they did make her uneasy. She showed a few to Alan, who immediately thought they looked less like a game and more like a statement of intent. Alan urged her to cut off all contact, believing the guy had clear issues and that staying in touch could be unsafe. Ingrid didn't tell her parents about this new acquaintance, worried they would react harshly. She had already experienced strict oversight from her family after a situation at age 16 and didn't want to be under suspicion again. For that reason, she kept all details of their chats and any meetings to herself. Privately, Guilherme kept a locked file that served as a personal journal. He didn't post or share it, but he occasionally mentioned it to a few trusted contacts. In it, he documented his thoughts in detail, which grew more extreme by the day. One recurring theme was his anger toward Christianity. He described his family as dishonest and naive, and the church as a tool of deception. In his private writings, Guilherme described hearing voices telling him to act. He didn't hide that his ultimate goal was to harm others as a way of expressing his worldview through acts of aggression. He saw himself as a soldier in a war against religious deception and viewed his intentions as a mission. He wrote that trust was a weakness and that the purpose of any connection with another person was control. He also claimed that pretending was one of his strengths, emphasizing that he could adapt depending on the situation. Kind to some, indifferent to others, and calculating toward those he believed could be useful to him. Ingrid and Guilherme kept up their online communication for several months before deciding to meet in person. Early in 2021, he suggested they meet face-to-face. Ingrid hesitated but agreed under the condition that it would be in a public place. He proposed a park in São Paulo, and that became their first meeting in real life. During the walk, Guilherme maintained the persona of a shy, insecure young man. He made no attempt to get physically closer, and behaved in a purely friendly manner. Still, in later messages, he made it clear he saw that meeting as the start of something special. For Ingrid, this was unexpected. She responded directly, telling him that nothing had changed and that she didn't have romantic feelings for him. She stressed that she didn't want to give him false hope. As before, Guilherme replied neutrally, thanked her for her honesty, and said their friendship mattered to him. But, internally, he took her refusal as a personal humiliation. Not long after, he invited her again, this time to his home. The reason sounded harmless. He said he wanted to play games together in a comfortable setting and have lunch. Since Guilherme's mother was at home that day, Ingrid assumed it would be safe. They had lunch, played for a while, and talked. Outwardly, nothing seemed off. But after she left, it became clear that Guilherme had used the visit to reinforce his own narrative. He began messaging her again, saying they were now in a relationship, and that things were becoming serious between them. Ingrid once again told him he was mistaken. The conversation was exhausting for her. This was the third time she had to explain she wasn't interested in a relationship, and that their meetings had no hidden meaning. Guilherme didn't argue openly, but began acting differently. He hinted at feeling let down, and sent vague messages like, "It'll all be over soon." Despite these unsettling comments, he continued to interact with her as though nothing was wrong. However, his messages increasingly revealed an obsessive focus on their meetings, reinterpreting them to carry more meaning than they actually had. Ingrid didn't share any of this with her parents. She believed she had the situation under control, and saw Guilherme as merely overly emotional. She ignored Alan's repeated warnings to cut off contact, even though he insisted that Guilherme's behavior was becoming more alarming. The situation kept moving in a one-sided direction. Ingrid felt nothing toward Guilherme except sympathy, while he convinced himself they were in a relationship of his own invention. He believed she simply didn't realize how close they supposedly were. This distortion of reality developed gradually, and outwardly, he continued to present himself as calm. Their next meeting was set to become a turning point. Around this time, his messages became less consistent, sometimes expressing complete trust, other times applying emotional pressure. Ingrid didn't realize that, for him, this was no longer just a conversation, but a step toward carrying out his plan. In February 2021, Ingrid was spending time at home. She wasn't feeling well and had taken a COVID-19 test. Until the results came in, she was advised not to leave the house or attend classes. Guilherme knew she was supposed to stay home, but he began urging her to visit him. At first, he simply said he wanted to talk. Then, he claimed a friend of his, supposedly a tattoo artist, was coming over to do a tattoo for him at home, and that the payment included the option for her to get one too. He framed it as a rare chance and a casual reason to meet. Ingrid was skeptical. She replied that she hadn't received her test results yet and wasn't sure if it was a good idea to go out. When the tattoo idea didn't work, he shifted tactics, complaining about his emotional state. In one message, he wrote bluntly that if she didn't come, he didn't know if he could handle another day. He emphasized that she didn't have to touch him or get a tattoo. He just needed her to be there. The constant pressure made Ingrid hesitate. She knew she wasn't obligated to go, but she feared something irreversible might happen if she refused, especially as he kept insisting on meeting while using desperation and hopelessness as leverage. The day before the meeting, Ingrid messaged Alan. He noticed her anxious tone and asked if everything was okay. She didn't go into details, but wrote that she wasn't sure how things would turn out. After a short exchange, she sent him, "If anything happens, goodbye." That message alarmed him. He tried to find out what she meant, but Ingrid stopped responding. When Ingrid arrived, Guilherme's mother was at home. The three of them had breakfast together. He acted calm, avoiding any concerning remarks or behavior. At 10:30 a.m., his mother left for work, and shortly after, his brother, who worked delivering food, also left. That left only Ingrid and Guilherme in the house. He led her to a room that had once belonged to his late brother. Up to that point, nothing seemed threatening. Ingrid even took a selfie with Guilherme and sent it to Alan, telling him everything was fine. That was the last message she sent to anyone. At that moment, Ingrid was completely alone, feeling unwell and without support. She hadn't told her parents the truth, and she'd kept her friends at a distance. Alan was the only person who knew about the meeting, but even he didn't have the full picture. Everything unfolded under a veil of secrecy. Guilherme, on the other hand, was following a plan he had prepared in advance. He had achieved what he wanted: a private meeting, time alone with her, no witnesses. This was the moment he had been building toward. All his earlier manipulations and conversations about depression had been nothing more than groundwork for this decisive step. Without warning, Guilherme attacked Ingrid. He had prepared in advance, bringing a large blade shaped like a machete. She was caught completely off guard. Investigators later noted there were no signs of a struggle, confirming she hadn't had a chance to defend herself. Guilherme struck her at least 5 times with deep blows. His intent was to cause severe, fatal harm, but he didn't fully carry out what he had in mind. Afterward, he took out a firearm and fired several shots. According to the investigation, Ingrid lost her life almost instantly. The assault was swift and premeditated. He had waited until the house was empty and chose a small, confined room where he could control the situation. After the crime, he didn't leave. Instead, he began recording the scene with his phone camera. He made several videos showing himself next to her in which he used crude language and made offensive remarks. In one clip, he even made a rude gesture toward the camera while standing in front of her, openly stating that he had committed the act. He sent the videos to various chat groups, including his gaming team, but viewers assumed they were fake, a special effect or a staged scene. This lack of reaction angered Guilherme. He then uploaded the clips to his social media pages, particularly hoping they would reach members of radical online groups he had previously engaged with. He expected this to bring him recognition and respect in those circles. Instead, they also dismissed the videos as either a provocation or an attention-seeking stunt. In the recordings, he appeared composed and even pleased. His demeanor was far from what one might expect from someone who had just committed a serious offense. There was no fear, remorse, or hesitation. His speech was clear and deliberate, emphasizing what he saw as the importance of his actions. In one video, he even stated this was only the first step in a larger plan that he had outlined in a separate document. When the reaction he wanted failed to materialize, Guilherme grew visibly frustrated. He wanted shock, outrage, and widespread discussion, not doubt. Realizing no one was taking it seriously, he stole a family member's car to leave the scene. At that point, he didn't try to hide or take evasive routes. He simply drove to a nearby city without explaining his destination. During the drive, Guilherme contacted his brother and admitted to taking Ingrid's life. At first, his brother thought it was a dark joke. Guilherme had made grim statements before, though he had never acted on them. But as the conversation went on, it became clear he was telling the truth. Guilherme gave detailed information about the location and circumstances and asked his brother not to interfere. Instead of panicking, his brother stayed calm and methodically convinced Guilherme not to escalate things further, urging him to stop and turn himself in to the police. He promised he would come and meet him. After a short time, Guilherme walked into the police station on his own and calmly stated that he was there to turn himself in for a killing. His demeanor was unusually composed. There were no signs of fear, panic, or any request for a lawyer. When asked about his motives, he said this was only the first stage of a larger plan described in his journal. At first, the officers on duty didn't believe him. Because of his calm behavior and the absence of any visible evidence on his clothing, there was genuine doubt about his claim. However, once they checked the address he provided and arrived at the location, his words were confirmed. The young woman's body was indeed found in the room he described. Family members who had returned home were in shock. The investigation began immediately after his arrest. Questions arose not only about the crime itself, but also about his motives, and why he was so determined to share the videos. Guilherme's actions didn't match the typical profile of a criminal. He hadn't tried to escape or destroy evidence. On the contrary, he had done everything possible to make sure as many people as possible knew about what had happened. After Guilherme Costa confessed, and the victim was found in his family's home, investigators faced another problem. They had no clear information on her identity. Ingrid Bueno had no documents with her, no student ID, no personal identification. In her backpack, there was nothing to directly confirm who she was. Neither Guilherme's mother nor his brother knew her. The two had intentionally kept their meeting secret. In her messages to relatives, Ingrid used a cover story, saying she was meeting a colleague from her internship. Her identity was confirmed through handwritten notes found in her bag. Among them was an address belonging to Ingrid's aunt and grandmother. Police went there, verified her identity, and informed the family about the tragedy. This was followed by the formal identification process. Her parents were in deep distress, and the videos Guilherme had circulated only made the news even more devastating. Guilherme's mother was also in shock. She said she had never seen Ingrid before and didn't know her son was in contact with anyone personally. What made it even harder for her was the fact that the crime had occurred in the very home she lived in. When shown the online videos, she refused to believe they were real. According to her, her son had never shown signs of cruelty. He had always been polite, helped around the house, and was caring toward his nieces. Law enforcement seized both of their phones. Ingrid's device contained messages, audio recordings, and photos that confirmed the nature of their communication and her growing unease in the days before her death. Of particular interest were her messages to Alan, her ex-boyfriend, where she expressed her doubts and concerns. Guilherme's phone had been partially wiped. He had deleted some conversations and files, but forensic specialists managed to recover a significant amount of data. Among the restored content were images with aggressive themes and links to radical online forums. They also found a text file titled, "My Journal." The contents of that file confirmed the crime was not spontaneous. In it, he described in detail how to elicit sympathy, how to secure emotional dependency, and how to manipulate someone's behavior without resorting to physical aggression until the very last moment. As part of the investigation, a psychological and psychiatric evaluation was ordered. It was carried out in several stages and included observation of his behavior, interviews with specialists, and a review of the case materials. The primary question for the experts was whether he understood the consequences of his actions at the time of the crime. The experts unanimously concluded that the defendant was fully aware of what he was doing, understood the consequences, and acted deliberately. They noted pronounced psychopathic traits, such as a lack of empathy, dishonesty, manipulative tendencies, emotional coldness, and an interest in aggressive behavior. However, these traits were not considered sufficient to exempt him from criminal responsibility. Guilherme's attorney attempted to challenge this conclusion by presenting an alternative opinion from an independent psychiatrist. That specialist diagnosed him with a severe personality disorder, claiming it impaired his ability to take responsibility for his actions, and that he required treatment rather than punishment. The court, however, rejected this opinion, citing its contradiction to the official expert report, its non-binding nature, as it was commissioned by the defense, and the defendant's behavior, which showed self-control and calculated decision-making. With the mental health defense no longer an option, the strategy shifted. The attorney began working to reduce the potential sentence, arguing Guilherme's young age, lack of prior convictions, and disadvantaged upbringing as mitigating factors. The trial for Guilherme Costa didn't start immediately. The first hearing was set for March 2022, a year after the crime, but was postponed after the prosecution stated they needed more time to analyze digital evidence, including messages, recovered files, and expert reports. A second delay occurred in May of that year, when the court could not locate witnesses who met the required criteria. It was only on August 8, 2022, that the proceedings officially began. By that time, the prosecution had compiled a detailed indictment. It was built on Guilherme's own admissions, materials from seized devices, crime scene videos, family testimony, and the psychiatric evaluation. Prosecutors argued that the crime was committed with particular cruelty, premeditation, and full awareness of its consequences. Once again, the defense attempted to cite the defendant's mental state, but the court dismissed those arguments. The judge also took into account Guilherme's post-crime behavior, his efforts to publicize what he had done, his sharing of videos, and his calm demeanor when turning himself into the police. During the hearings, Guilherme did not deny his guilt, and throughout his statement, he showed no sign of remorse. At one point, he even commented that he had accomplished what he planned, and only regretted that the public's reaction was not as intense as he had hoped. The court found him guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. His sentence included 14 years in a high-security facility, along with mandatory psychiatric monitoring and periodic evaluations before any potential release. The court emphasized that these control measures were necessary, given his pronounced personality disorders and high risk of reoffending. Ingrid's family received the verdict with disappointment. In their view, the punishment was too lenient. In Brazil, the maximum sentence for this charge can be up to 30 years, and they had expected a harsher decision. Her parents and close relatives repeatedly stated that the defendant's behavior left no doubt about the danger he posed, and that the public nature of the crime, along with the videos he posted afterward, reinforced this. Guilherme's mother publicly apologized to Ingrid's family. She admitted she had not realized the severity of her son's problems, and said she deeply regretted what had happened. She insisted she had no access to his journal, and had not noticed any warning signs. Her words, however, found no sympathy from Ingrid's relatives, who believed that the inaction of the adults in his life played a role in the tragedy. Yet the story did not end with the sentencing. In 2023, law enforcement uncovered another lead. An analysis of Guilherme's online activity revealed that he might not have been the only one involved in the planning. Investigators determined that before the crime, he had been in contact with several members of radical online groups. They identified 4 individuals: Gabriel Barreto Villar, Carlos Eduardo Custodio do Nascimento, William Maza dos Santos, and Vitor Hugo Souza Rocha, who, according to the case files, had encouraged him and discussed possible crime scenarios with him. All 4 were later taken into custody. One of them even called Ingrid's father to mock her death, further confirming the group's involvement and strengthening the prosecution's position. The investigation continued, but at the close of the main trial, the fate of these individuals remained unresolved. One key question remained unanswered. Was Guilherme Costa a victim of outside influence, or the mastermind who used others to validate his own ideas? Investigators noted that he displayed a high level of control, arranging the meeting himself, choosing the time and place, and acting without threats or direct orders from anyone else. In fact, he seemed determined to carry out his plan independently. Those who worked with him during the case noticed a stark contrast between his behavior during interrogations and in court. At first, he spoke calmly and matter-of-factly about the details of the crime, but during sentencing, he showed emotion and even cried. Experts suggested this was likely not remorse, but a reaction to losing control and watching his own illusions collapse. The crime sparked public outrage. The videos Guilherme recorded spread online, and public discussion focused not only on the act itself, but on how someone showing clear signs of radicalization could remain unnoticed. The story of Ingrid Bueno became a chilling example of how misplaced trust and the absence of systemic safeguards can lead to devastating consequences. Thanks for watching. Smash that like button, drop a comment, and share to help grow the channel. Your support means the world. Catch you next time.